Welcome to today's webinar, episode 3 of After the Crossroads: AI and Our Future. The theme of today will be the rewriting of industry and a discussion of the impact now and anticipated of AI on industry in a broad sense. Artificial intelligence is moving well beyond the confines of Silicon Valley, quietly but profoundly, reshaping the very industries that sustain our daily lives: energy, agriculture, manufacturing, even transportation. This edition of the KEI Network's newsletter this past Sunday explored how AI is not only making these sectors more efficient, but also redefining what productivity, sustainability, and competitiveness mean in the 21st century. Early AI adoption has been about optimization, that is, fewer breakdowns, better resource use, faster production, lower costs. But as the leaders we spoke with, they spoke of caution. Cost cutting alone has limits. True growth lies in the reimagining of business models, creating new products, capturing untapped markets, knowing the consumer, where they buy, when they buy, how they buy. Whether it's AI-driven energy services, climate-resilient crop development, or on-demand manufacturing, the opportunities and the challenges are immense. These shifts are also transforming the role of engineers, demanding training that integrates advanced data skills, systems thinking, and ethical awareness alongside traditional technical expertise. So that's the background for today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. Our panel is made up of Bill Whitelaw in the energy industry, Shaun Haney, agriculture, Sriraj Meenavilli, manufacturing, and Yogi Schulz, a longtime network advisor in engineering. He'll be representing the profession, which is pretty well the foundation of most of our industries today and likely well into the future. So I've got a series of questions that I've shared with the panelists in advance, and I'll be posing them to the 5 of them one at a time. Hopefully we'll wrap up with about 15 minutes left, and I'll have a chance to pose questions from the viewers or comments that will engage the viewers in the discussion as well. So first question, I'm going to pose this one to you, Shaun, in that you're not located here in Alberta. Oh, yes, you are. You're in Lethbridge.
I'm in Lethbridge, yep.
Lethbridge still is in Alberta, right?
We are, yes. We up until this point, at least last time I checked.
Okay, Shaun, so many early industrial AI projects have focused on efficiency and cost savings, as I referenced, but the newsletter warned that this is not a sustainable growth strategy. In your experience, what steps are companies taking, at least in the agricultural sector, or should be taking, to move beyond this efficiency plateau toward real growth?
Yeah, you can only take that cost cutting so far. Eventually, when you get to zero, you can't go into negative territory. So, when I look across the agricultural landscape, whether that's primary producers or especially in the corporate community, there is, I think, a lot are still in the we're feeling it out sort of stage. Like we're testing the waters. We know in our market research that we've done, about 30% of Canadian farmers say that they are using AI. One of the curious, I actually probably think that number's higher, because if you're using Chrome, for example, you're using AI. You just don't even know it through some of the Gemini searches and stuff like that. So that number is going to do nothing but absolutely increase. I think from a growth perspective, one of the examples that I think of is artificial intelligence in like plant breeding, where there's a lot of data calculation that happens in plant breeding. But so obviously there's a really good fit there for AI. So maybe we're cost saving, we're eliminating maybe some of those junior data scientist people, maybe it's junior plant breeders. But what we're doing is we're able to look at data and forecast based on some of the modeling. We're able to speed up from start to finish, that we're bringing hybrids or varieties to the market, which really provides the opportunity for growth, getting out of that efficiency. Well, it is efficient, but at the same time, you're also being able to bring products to the market a lot faster, which obviously is tied to increased revenue and all the benefits of that. So that's one example that comes to mind.
Bill, what about the energy industry?
It's interesting. I'll preface my remarks because I agree entirely with what Shaun said so well there. But what I get fascinated looking at is I look at the four generations, demographic generations that work in the sector. And there's very interesting interplays around AI literacy between Xers, boomers, millennials, and Zers relative to, I mean, I talk to a lot of young geoscientists and young engineers who are Gen Z, and they've never known anything but AI as being ubiquitous in their lives versus a lot of my fellow boomers on the geoscience and engineering and business side. We're having to learn and think about new skills. But as I pointed to somebody out the other day, is we've been doing SCADA acquisition of data for decades, since the early 60s, in terms of, and when you think about oil and gas as a manufacturing sector, is, the real opportunity now is all of that data we gathered, and it told us a certain range of things in terms of process control and make predictive maintenance and that sort of thing. But the smart companies, and I know a number of the operating companies are doing this, are going back and they're having the AI tools troll through all the data from years past that just sort of, as they say, sat on the cutting room floor. And so what they're finding new efficiencies out of old efficiencies, if I could say it that way. So it's almost a circular data economy, if you will. And it's quite fascinating to see the, and I'll, with Sriraj and Yogi weighing in on this, be able to sort of, so it's put a new efficiency into the manufacturing, and whether that's the front end at the drilling and completions end, or it's towards the rec and rem end of an asset's life cycle, that old data they're teaching old data new tricks through AI application and finding new efficiencies that they never imagined before, right? In terms of how data from 20 years ago is speaking in a contemporary context. So,
Bill, same thing happening from in crop protection with you dealing with weed resistance, going back to things that you initially formulations or actives that maybe didn't pass some of the initial bars, going back and reanalyzing and trying to look at stuff something that's been on the shelf for 15 years and trying to bring it back to the market, maybe looking at it a little bit different way.
well, and just as Perry, to riff off of what you've just said, and I'll tell you this funny anecdote. I said to a senior executive in the industry the other day, CEO of a major oil and gas company, I said, I'd love to run an AI tool over your Outlook calendar for 25 years of the meetings that you've had, because it would tell me a lot. And it goes to your point about efficiency, in terms of the life cycle of that company who's with the same organization for 2.5 decades. And I said, so my point to him was, we're awash in data that we're just rediscovering where it's hidden, and it's the same thing on the farm and the ranch, Shaun, exactly. So.
Sriraj, give us a sense of the relationship of AI to manufacturing, the extent to which it's being adopted or not in the future.
Yeah, and I think what Bill was just talking about, that's a really great point, because a lot of that old data that exists, that's what people are starting to try and leverage first, especially with doing new design, or we're seeing a lot in with engineers having all this old data, being able to assist in doing new design or how to program the new machines, generating that G code. All of that is being automated, or even the trial and testing of new products, that's being short cycled because we're leveraging all the previous successful products or all of that data that we had before. So that's one place I think where people are starting, and probably the biggest and most successful implementations for AI have been in definitely predictive maintenance, and also it would be in, now one that's very successful would be the defect detection using vision, which is very much short cycling the total production time and catching the errors upstream as opposed to later where it's more costly.
So when we discuss manufacturing, are we also talking logistics? I mean, warehousing and transportation, because we certainly hear of warehousing being totally automated without any jobs. And I can remember talking to the economic development officer in my own region, who is adamant that warehousing was the future job maker for their economy. And I thought, this guy is so off base. With automation coming, it's likely you won't sniff a human being near a warehouse for ages. Certainly, Amazon's got well advanced in that regard.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I don't think it's exactly there yet. Fully automated warehouses or fully automated manufacturing facilities, that's definitely in the future and it's coming. Right now, I think there's a lot of aided and assisted work, leveraging all of that information that previously existed. Even something like one of the it's when you think about warehousing or even for a production plant, so you have what you have to manufacture and you have to warehouse some amount of raw materials. So a lot of manufacturers want to be just in time because that's very good for cash. You don't have to put a lot of upfront capital. You want to have that cash to cash cycle as small as possible. So when you think about production planning, managing your demand, managing the supply chain, and managing the warehouse, these are all usually very different departments. But now, because we have the ability to interconnect them and do optimization or solve for the best path using and adjusting for dynamic constraints is what we call it. But it's basically, you know, how reliable is a vendor? That changes over time. But being able to account for that so that you can be just in time and maintain low cash uh, output, that's what I think is going to be one of the biggest impacts, and especially in the automation.
That's really interesting, is the extent to which AI is breaking down borders and allowing the integration of what were formerly little empires or little institutes. I wonder if universities will sort of wake up to the idea that maybe we don't need all these deans and all these individual departments. Maybe we need a university of learning or knowledge and get out of all of these silos. Okay, your turn, Yogi. I know you're just thirsting and chomping at the bits of this one. Let's hear how engineering fits in this.
Okay, before I jump into engineering, Perry, I'll take up Bill's suggestion and talk very briefly about energy. As you all know, the Western Canadian Sediment Basin has been very thoroughly explored. So some oil companies, for example, Chevron, decided there's no more oil here, we're out of here. Well, I suggest that's a huge mistake. We're now in a back to the future moment where there's at least two huge opportunities. One is in well log interpretation. We have a lot of well logs that haven't been interpreted that well, and there's many more opportunities. And the other is in something called tower sheets. The tower sheet is a shift by shift record of what happened in every drilling operation in Alberta and perhaps Western Canada. And it's never been properly digitized, and it's never been properly interpreted. You can request a copy of the individual sheet, but what good does that do you really? That's why very few people do that. So I'm expecting that AI is going to have a huge impact on those two areas. Now, that's not I'm kind of taking some of Bill's thunder here, so I don't mean to do that. So
You're complimenting.
Okay, back to engineering. So there are real applications, and Sriraj already hit on the one about downtime and maintenance prediction and all that, and that is a multi-zillion-dollar opportunity. We're also finding that AI will encourage more or enable more developments in robotics, 3D printing, and many categories of engineering application software, such as design optimization, process optimization, resource allocation. And the benefit of all that is faster design cycles, better risk management, and improved decision-making. Now, we also have hype application. I'm sure all of us are aware of how much hype is involved in AI at the moment. So in the engineering space, some people are claiming that AI will produce almost instantaneous high-quality design cycles. Now that is hype. It will radically shorten, not just a little bit, and simplify supply chains, not likely. Substantially reduce production costs. And Shaun already talked about that. So those are examples of vendor hype. On the other hand, there are speculative future applications, like in material science. There is an enormous amount of work left to be done in how molecules actually interact with each other when they're in various mixtures. And that's created endless high-cost experimentation. And I'm expecting AI to break through that And I'm basing that on the example of DeepMind's breakthrough in work around protein folding. I'm expecting that can be expanded into material science. Also in the future, we're expecting some text to design applications. And the idea there is you can take a short text prompt and have AI turn that into an entire design for a product. That's going to take a while, but it will significantly change the nature of engineering design work. And then we have AI code generation. Now, my comment here is actually already out of date. I said AI's ability to generate application code will advance to encompass entire systems. Notice the word will. Well, in fact, there's now someone who's announced a system and people have been using it and find it satisfactory that can already do that. So that's the announcement of the week, where my future prognostication has turned into reality in the short time between when Perry asked me to do this and today when I'm doing it.
Well, so often when we hear the word hype is simply, it's going to be next year, not next week. I mean, the rate of change in this area, and now that capital is flowing as fast as it is, and what is being demonstrated, as already discussed, is happening so quickly that in order to maintain a competitive advantage, it seems to me you got to be in the AI business.
Yogi is absolutely right, and you're absolutely right about this. What we would call the Gartner hype cycle, kind of where do we position all this stuff? And even this conversation, though, is what we've done is we've reduced all of our conversation to AI as this universal Borg-like tools. And I suspect that what we're starting to see now, and what we'll see in an accelerated way, is a level of AI toolkit literacy, because all the layers and the various tools. The last year and a half has been spent marveling at large language models, but it's way more complex than that in terms of what has been at work and what will be at work in terms of all these applications. And so I think what's going to emerge is a more nuanced discussion around at the application specific level, and a new level of literacy will emerge out of that. And that will start to separate the hype wheat from the hype chaff in relative to what's real. And, because you already see those of us who've been around long enough remember all the .com, .bomb headlines about overinflated stocks and valuations, and that's emerging now. And but you can see some of the tech companies are trying to take the edge off that to say, no, these are real world applications that are actually, to the point that everybody's made so far so eloquently, is doing some really productive work, real efficient work, and that sort of thing. And I would add just one last point to Yogi's point about those tower reports. There's a company I'm working with right now that is looking to digitize them, because there's a direct relation on what happened on that drilling rig between that and the potential for site contamination based on what drilling fluids and how that drilling fluids may have been spilled or not spilled and that sort of thing. And so as we wrestle, for example, with the whole mature assets mess here in Alberta of all those wells and gathering lines and flow lines and that sort of thing, AI is going to be a critically important tool in terms of helping us high grade and triage which assets are the worst and how to look after them most efficiently at the beginning. But it goes to Yogi's very salient point about the data that we forgot about back in the day that we need to rediscover and get it under the scanner now.
In the first 20 minutes, we've made strong arguments of the role that AI is already playing in terms of reducing costs, increasing productivity, revenue. And we haven't discussed, however, the implications on those who are going to be charged with using this tool, engineers and others, and labor in general. I'd like to talk about two sides of this coin. One of them is the potential risk of AI being as disruptive and as quick, meaning workforces having difficulty adjusting in time, universities having difficulty, or technical institutes having difficulty. How do we get our labor ready? And is the threat of AI and industry real? Or is this just a little bit of, quote, hype? Or do we have time to make these adjustments? I'll start out with you, Sriraj, because just the role that you've got in manufacturing, you must be well aware of the labor implications of AI, positive and negative. So your turn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest risks is, especially with AI, we all know that they're what we call as black box models.
Can you
So,
speak up a little bit louder, by the way?
sorry, yeah, absolutely. So with AI, we all know that what these models are built out as, they're black box models, right? Which means we don't fully know uh, what the thought process behind why the output of the model is saying what it is. So I think one risk or hard thing, or the way to integrate some of these things into especially manufacturers, is having that change management. So having people understand and be able to trust that the output of the model, or if it's predictive maintenance, or if it's assisting an engineer in doing design, that the output actually has validity. So I think from an adoption perspective, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. And the second thing is, from a job perspective, a lot of the jobs, the criteria for what needs to be done, if you're an operator, your job will change from purely operating the machine to now orchestrating the AI operating the machine. Or if you're quality control, it's the same thing. You're now integrating this tool into your workflow, and you no longer you make the final decision, but you get a lot of help, or you get the prescriptions from the AI. If you're doing scheduling, or if you're doing even one of the examples we talked about with inventory or warehousing, traditionally it's someone's role to decide how much inventory or stock you're going to keep on hand. And people make this decision based off of what's my demand, what's my customers look like, and what is my procurement schedule. And they think about these things to figure out how much inventory I should keep or stocking I should keep. But going forward, it's going to be a system that calculates this and figures out what's actually ideal for you to maintain. And so people will now have to shift their thinking a little bit to be able to understand how the system is working and whether the system's output is valid, as opposed to them coming up with the output itself. And I think that's probably that's the change management and the changing of the job roles are probably the two largest impacts to the workforce.
Shaun, your turn. What do you have to share with us about workforce adjustment in the face of AI?
Yeah, those comments made me kind of think about, across all sectors, if we're going to eliminate all the junior positions, whether it's junior copywriters, junior paralegals, junior this, junior that, where are the juniors going to come to become the seniors going forward in some of these roles? I think that's a big question as people try to develop experiences. I think, in some cases, agriculture sort of it has transitioned in this regard. I think of robotic milking. I also think of, where the role of the milker, one time was to go out to the barn and pull some teats and, fill that can of milk and job done, 2 or 3 times a day. Now what they do is they still go to the barn, but there's robots that are maximizing the productivity of that milking, maybe even pushing some feed. And so the milker's role, or the dairy farmer's role, has moved from doing the actual manual part to actually looking at the data and analyzing from a herd perspective what needs to happen and how to maximize the output of those animals. Same from a broadacre or row crop standpoint. You think about some of the combine technology that is out there. Was kind of this technology has really evolved. And it was maybe I think I first saw it in about 2019, prior to the AI boom. It was AI before it was AI. Is harvest sensor technology, where previously the farmer sat in the combine and would adjust the header, more importantly the speed of the machine based on the density of the crop, to maximize, to keep those concaves as full as possible to maximize the productivity of that machine. A lot of human error to that, especially if you've ever plugged a combine. There's some regrets on that error. But now there's technology that basically the machine does that itself. It has sensors that look out onto the crop, measures the density. The machine speeds up and slows down as it's required to do so to maximize the absolute throughput of that. Is there still somebody in that machine in that cabin? Well, absolutely there is, but they're looking at they're looking at the gauges, they're looking at the monitors. You know, there's a lot of screens in those machines nowadays, and they're more of an operator as opposed to a driver of that combine. So I really think the farm has really done a lot of shifting in regards to some of those skills and duties that the farmer would take on depending on what the season is.
No, knowing very little about farming, when farmers hibernate in the winter, they used to hang around their machinery, work with their tractors, etc. Who the hell's fixing the robots in the winter, getting rid of the rust or the wiring? Is maintenance an issue of this new workforce called the robot in the barn?
Well, we could do a whole webinar probably on right to repair.
Yeah.
for sure. I think that is a growing issue. You know, electrical skill is definitely become more of a need on the farm if you are able to actually work on some of the equipment. This is a big friction factor right now, Perry, in terms of more and more this equipment, because of the software component, it needs to be taken to the dealer to get the required maintenance done. So there is still a lot of maintenance that is done in shops in the wintertime. But to be honest with you, it's less and less. There's more and more kids coming back to the farm with data science degrees or business degrees, as opposed to somebody that took heavy duty mechanics.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Shaun. Bill, what's your view on energy?
I'm gonna flip it on its head and say the big problem is not worrying about job force elimination. I think it's about human capital attraction in the future. I mean, when I sat on the task force for Canada's next generation energy workforce, and we got a especially in this build fast and build big environment, we got a real problem in terms of who's going to be doing all the work relative to, as guys like Yogi and I age out of the ecosystem, and we're aging out as faster than we're aging in, and yet technology is the calling card by which the next generation of geo and engineer and business folks. And so the energy company that doesn't, either on the operating side or the service side, that doesn't have a well-articulated strategy from human capital attraction to say, you get to come and play with some pretty cool tech and solve some pretty cool environmental issues right at the moment, we'll 5 to 10 years from now, we'll all of a sudden realize, man, you know, those old boomers, we can't teach them much anymore. And the young folks who they've grown up with this as part of their personal life. And, you know, when I talk to high school students and I talk to the first years students in Polytechnic, they're savvy bunch. And what they need is a calling card to say, here we are at this big oil sands company, and you know what, we're using AI to drive these massive 400-ton dump trucks like this sort of thing. And I think I said to, I'll just close on this, I said to Mark Little, just as he was leaving Suncor, I said, we need to get the narrative shift to say, hey, we're a technology industry that just happens to produce hydrocarbon-based products, just like Tesla is a mining company that just happens to produce EVs. And we've always struggled with that narrative, as you guys know all that, right? In terms of so my point is companies that don't articulate the work they're doing in the space with various AI and MI and ML tools are not going to attract the best and brightest folks into their workforce in the future.
We certainly heard that in the youth series on at the Crossroads, as youth were well aware of the relevance of continuous learning. And concerned that the educational systems, institutions were still in a status quo mode without really appreciating the relevance of what they were already anticipating in the job market. Okay, Yogi, your turn. Weigh in.
Well, I'm going to weigh in on productivity, profitability, and risk management. For engineers, the most immediate productivity improvement is in research and in document writing. Like, that's the here and now, the very simple applications, and I'm expecting design will soon follow. In profitability, we're certainly seeing risk reduction opportunities being implemented, and Shaun already discussed that there's an end to that road that's looming for everybody. But let's talk about risk management in an engineering context. My view is that AI applications often increase risks. They don't decrease them. So the challenge for engineers is actually to become more thorough in their risk assessment and their understanding of the limitations of the AI tools that have been thrust upon them. An interesting example is that more AI projects succeed when they involve vendors and build partnerships than AI projects that are based simply on grow your own software in the engineering space. So the strategy to contain risk and increase success is to find skills and partners to work with rather than think you're going to do this all by yourself.
So much of this discussion and of writing about AI is technical, is about machines. And any discussion about people is the fear of displacement or machines becoming alternatives because they're so much more efficient, so much more reliable, and ultimately so much less cost. And yet we're coming out of a period of 10 years about ESG. You know, the importance of recognizing the value of the environment, the value of social inclusion, the value of governance being sensitive to issues more than simply profits. Where does AI stand in all this? Have we put ESG behind us? Or has management or the natural forces of the way capital actually works take into consideration sustainability? The capacity of AI is not just about hype and a short-term profit gain, but what the overall sustainable impact of AI is going to be on industry. It's a very broad question. It relates to governance. It relates to values of people. I'm going to start out with you on this, Yogi, even because I end up with you last. This is a pretty broad question. It takes us into almost the social element of industry, so often thought of as an engineer's haven of hardware and physics and no psychology and no personal sensitivities at all. Where do you see AI in industry as it relates to people?
Well, perhaps AI can help many organizations and businesses make progress on ESG. My problem with ESG in the past, it's been very ideological, and that's just gotten a lot of people's raised a lot of hackles, with me included, where social ideas were pushed to a ridiculous extent, and corporations were all of a sudden in charge of solving most of the world's social problems. And I think that's nuts. On the other hand, I think we need to be a lot more sustainable, what you said. And what sustainability means is we need to reduce the inputs to what we make and also continue or increase our focus on what do we do with the garbage that we produce as an undesirable output from production. How much more can we get into recycle and reuse? And the people who've been pushing that perhaps have been pushing it too hard, but nonetheless, there's a core point in there that we do need to be much more attentive to the resources that our engineering and manufacturing industries and even service industries and electrical power, what they consume and the garbage they create along the way. We need major improvements in all of that. And I'm expecting that as the price of commodities continues to go up, the business case for taking ESG more seriously will also improve. And there's a social push to do that. When we see the photos of the garbage in the ocean, people are saying, hey, this can't go on. Now, the implication of all of that is that the cost of our products and services is going to go up because that disposal was all an externality. We didn't have to worry about it. But we're now at the point where we do have to worry about it. On the other hand, AI and other technology advances are going to reduce the cost of production, so we can afford to do that.
Well, it's comforting. Maybe less politics and ideology and a little more of a practical model. Sriraj,
Hallelujah.
what do you see in manufacturing?
Yeah, I think what Yogi said, I completely agree with. AI can definitely help in improving the efficiencies for, especially in production, or reducing the waste. This is a huge concern, especially in food and beverage manufacturing, where food waste or the raw materials or byproducts that get made, they all have expiry dates. So a lot of this consideration is very large there, but I think the more important aspect is the technology itself is not magically going to make these changes happen. This has to be an initiative from upper management. They have to care to not or reduce their waste or set targets for reducing the energy usage. And the technology itself can help do that, but that has to be the initiative of the people running the business, and not just be pushed by financial motivators.
Bill, your perspective, then Shaun.
Yeah, I'll give two in our backyard points, and one, we'll have the E in the environmental. And when I think about, from a decarbonization perspective, the role AI is going to play on emissions management at the front end in terms of some of the cool things that are happening in the methane space, in terms of right here in Alberta, we were birthing some world-class firms that are looking at the way sensors are working and the way that neural networks are working on emissions management, but also back to Yogi's point about all the data we need to rediscover in terms of the seismic data that will give us clues to the efficient storage of CO2 subsurface, right, in terms of the safety around where that plume and pressure front are going to go. And so that becomes an ESG moment where AI has served up an environmental for an oil sands or an operating company. But the other one I would point out that's what's really happening, there's some real cool moves being made to use AI technologies to capture transgenerational indigenous knowledge oral systems. And that is a fascinating. So there's almost like an artificial reconciliation movement kind of thing going on, because of course, that's a form of data, right? Those, if you think about that indigenous capacity to think 7 generations out of a decision that you're going to make today, what is the impact on that? And if you reverse that and you capture it all before all the elders are gone, that for the smart oil and gas company that invests in that, that'll write their ESG report for the next 25 years for them, right, on the S side of things.
I think from my perspective, some examples come to mind that are being used today and are just going to improve based on some of the use of AI going forward. I think of fertilizer optimization, and taking 4R strategy to the total next level. Precision irrigation in terms of limiting or better managing how you remember not too long ago we were using hand moves with impact sprinklers, and we're moving them every 8 hours and really flooding out the land, even going back to flood irrigation. Now we're only applying when we really, really need to with high efficiency nozzles and traceability platforms. More and more, I think of canola going into Europe, for example, and some of the environmental compliance that needs to happen. And on the compliance side of it, a lot of farms and ranches across the country they're entrepreneurs, right? They don't have like an ESG staff to manage some of this stuff. And so the ability to complete forms as small businesses through the use of AI and be able to comply with some of that paperwork, if that can happen through AI, we're making massive steps forward.
Incredible. Okay, guys, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask if you feel there's anything we've missed or anything you really want to emphasize, make sure the audience it's a tagline for you. Bill, I'll start with you. Anything we've missed or any concluding comments you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, the only thing I would make, and this is me putting my language maven's hats on, is to think about, I just had a chuckle to myself the other day about OpenAI having to recall ChatGPT-5 because a multitude of users they were alarmed by the coldness of its personality. And so, I say to all the young folks in my life, there's an artificial personality component to artificial intelligence, right? In terms of the way meaning is made in communicative interaction. And and I've got 7 different apps on my phone, and they are incredibly useful and they are incredibly useless simultaneously, depending on the context in which I'm using them. And I would just say, as we go forward, is don't mistake a chatbot engagement with an actual human chat, right? In terms of, and I see that in a worrying way with my own kids, is right that they're so fixated on that engagement with Perplexity or Claude that they're forgetting to talk to their dad. And I think we're probably going to have to hit a wall, so from a societal perspective with that. before we learn the hard way that human engagement still trumps all engagement, because these AI tools, these LLMs, they're semantically inert, right? They don't make meaning, right? They give you a process of a bunch of data, and it's often very useful. And to everybody's point here, it's serving up, making us a better society. But it also, you know, it can also destroy social capital overnight if you're not careful about it. So there's my soapbox, Yogi.
I mean, you know, hype goes both ways. There's hypersensitivity, which means oversensitivity, overproduction, and therefore eroding real value. That's almost what the Luddites were all about. Shaun, your perspective, what do you want to share with us as a wrap-up?
Yeah, just to build on what Bill said, you know, I look, you know, I think especially as you roll out AI into your workflows, there is a lot of apprehension, like, oh, you're trying to replace us, right? And it's very, very difficult from a management perspective in leadership trying to communicate how AI can play a role inside of our own businesses. And to Bill's point, I think of, you know, I often try to say internally, AI doesn't replace people. Think about it, how it enhances people. And from a productivity standpoint, you know, I was listening to an interview on Bloomberg Radio last week where they talked about the increased productivity, about, you know, people that are using it properly, where, you know, it used to, you know, the example the guy gave is, and I don't know what business he was in, but he talked about how, you know, we'd have to do this with 50 people to achieve 200 million in revenue. Now we're doing it with 10. And that is, so from a productivity standpoint, that's a little bit of the game changer. Although it is, we found out during COVID, we need people interaction, right? Being shut off and not interacting with people is incredibly dangerous to the human race. So we cannot forget that.
Yogi, you want to weigh in here, and then Sriraj will have the last word.
Sure. So I've been thinking about, well, where is AI headed? When you think about it today, AI is quite people-centric in the sense that AI waits for us to provide questions to answer. But I think the developments are that the AI will begin to reason more like humans. And this reasoning is called AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And it can handle more profound questions. So for example, AI can start to ask the right questions, or at least propose better questions. And AI can help engineers in making higher order product development or manufacturing decisions. And will AI supplant engineers in making product development or manufacturing decisions? I think that's that everybody's panicked about, like Shaun just said a minute ago. But I'm not sure that's true. I agree with Shaun that we should look on this as an improved tool that can make us all smarter, better looking, and more productive.
I like the better looking piece. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
you like that part? Okay.
IBM was quite clear when Watson came out that AI, or Watson, maybe an early version of AI, was going to be an aid, not an alternative. But then again, it's trying to sell its services, not displace them. But there are skeptics. Siraj.
Yeah, I think the biggest maybe point of caution from especially an AI adoption standpoint, or people that are wanting to roll out softwares like this in their facilities, a lot of what people think or want in their facility is what the latest and greatest, the cool, most functionality type of applications. Like I want fully predicted demand, for example, or I want my supply chain completely understood. And I think one point of caution on this, at least what we've seen doing a lot of integration in manufacturing, majority of manufacturers are small and medium-sized businesses who have had, you know, outdated ERP systems, or even CNC machines that are maybe 10 or 20 years old, that may not be able to provide the level of data. And even if you do have the data, it might not be at a certain quality or labeled in a way that you can integrate these solutions so easily. So I think probably the one word of caution, or a better plan to actually integrate AI into your operations, would be to start small and have a plan of how you want to slowly roll out and have a digital transformation plan that can help you get to that final stage that you want to.
I think that's an important point to end up with. I was going to pose an extra question, which is why the slow uptake among some industries? Manufacturing is well known to be very slow, as was retail in the take-up of emerging technologies. You know, maybe it's the capital cost, maybe it's the unfamiliarity, maybe it's the threat, maybe it's the lack of quick returns. But one of the concerns we have of Canada is the slow take-up of these soft technologies. Jeff, your turn. We're going to entertain questions from the viewers or comments. Any viewpoint you want to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So my experience working with AI is that I'm able to ask much more complex questions than I've been able to ask in the past and work out solutions. So there are things that I wrote about in my book that I didn't even know really how to begin to tackle in terms of engineering estimates and that sort of stuff. And I'm able to go to AI and get, ask a very complicated query and get a reasonable response, and I ask it to show its work so I can go in and check to make sure that the stuff is reasonable. But I'm rather amazed at how much that's allowing me to work on bigger problems, I guess, which is very interesting. It's turning out to be a very useful tool for me, and I'm quite impressed with, particularly with Grok, in terms of the ability to answer technical questions.
Yogi, engineering as a profession either feels threatened or feels that this tool is magic because it enables the engineer to do so much more if empowered. Are engineers, as you've looked at the profession, as you've looked at the universities and the institutes today, are they adapting to the point that they will help companies in Canada increase their productivity, or are they there? Are they riding this wave?
I think the reaction is all over the map. There's some individual engineers that are just really, really panicked about all of this. And some of the reaction varies by generation. We've touched on that. But overall, I see a huge opportunity to use this new tool because there are a myriad of problems that have eluded us. I mean, just the very simple facts of efficiency in electrical generation. We know there's huge opportunities to improve that. Waste in manufacturing, new materials to make products lighter while performing better and perhaps reducing the cost, or making complex products simpler to operate and less dangerous to the operator. The most extreme energy example of that was that the CNRL employee who turned the wrong valve in the wrong direction killed himself and blew up $700 million worth of processing equipment in Fort McMurray. I mean, that's an outlier example, but there are thousands of smaller ones.
Bill, you want to make
one of the things, and Jeff Kramer knows this well, as does Yogi and Sriraj and Shaun. It's, sometimes when we talk about the fear of adoption, or we have to, the broader issue is, do you have an innovation ethos or an innovation culture within your organization? That has to pre-exist, because, for me, it's always a precondition, because I deal with a lot large operating companies, and some of them are so moribund and bureaucratic and slow. They're not bound by an innovation culture. Versus yeah, I know you hear what I'm saying, Yogi, right? And that's on a farm, that's in a small shop. But if you start to ask yourself, and everybody says we want to be innovative, and a lot of you press on that, and people say, but somebody needs to show us how to be innovative. And so I think a precondition for AI adoption within an organization, or at least having the conversations around should we go in that direction, presupposes that you worked hard to establish an open mind about innovation more generally. And AI is just one slice of that broader innovation conversation. So
A question's been raised in the chat. Rachel might want to raise it, but I'll raise it for her. Let's be honest about all this. The increased efficiency means less humans are going to be needed in order to do the work. You see farms today consolidating. Less farmers, more machinery, more technology. We see it everywhere. Who cares? Who is going to mitigate the rate of change? Who is going to mitigate the impact on human beings? We have in the welfare state programs of transition. So if an individual is in fact laid off because of an industry event or a new technology, government steps in with training grants and things of that nature. Does anybody really take seriously what the impact of AI is going to be on the workforce?
I'm going to take the optimistic view. I think, although this feels like a major step change, we've had a lot of technological change over history. At one point, being a blacksmith was a tremendous occupation. And there was a blacksmith shop in every single small town. There no longer is. Rachel had asked the question about, how is doing the same work with 10 people instead of 50 not eliminating jobs? It is for that one entity. It's a difference of 40. But the better question is, what have those 40 people been freed up to do? Maybe they're also they're gonna set up 4 different companies that are doing $200 million, and so we've just massively increased the productivity. I just finished the first season of 1923 in the Yellowstone series, and they were freaking out about the washing machine, and they were freaking out about motorized vehicles moving away from horse. I think we have a history here, even in the last 150 years, of freaking out about technologies. I think there's going to be things for people to do, although those jobs are going to be different.
Well, I mean, we adopted 100 years ago public education in the belief that education was a critical value in order to make the accommodations necessary to manage change. We are now reaching a point in education to realize that the conveying of knowledge is not the answer. It's the conveying of continuous learning, and recognizing that we as human beings are resilient if we will exercise the capacity that God gave us of learning.
Yep.
And the challenge of emerging technologies is challenging human beings, not about education, but about a relevance and a readiness to embrace learning. Shirley, your turn.
Yes, I wanted to talk about this agricultural area too, so I have a question for Shaun. I know in my lifetime, and most of ours, because we're an older group here, we were impacted personally by agriculture and farming. I know that my grandparents both came from that kind of background, and I spent a lot of time there. Now, with all the technology advances in agriculture, we're moving to this huge urbanization trend and now this huge densification trend. How can we, with AI, I think that's even going to get worse. How can we encourage people to go back into rural communities and not just center in huge cities with all these urbanization issues that are developing?
Oh boy, that's a fantastic question. Rural viability is a big issue. When as it relates to this topic, having access to rural broadband is exceptionally critical. And so if we're going to expect businesses of the future that maybe those are businesses that are supporting the industry of agriculture, or maybe it's the local school to keep it open, you have to at this point, having high-speed internet is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And if you aren't able to offer that as a small community, it becomes very difficult to attract people. For certain. So I think that is really one of the major blocks that needs to be overcome. And we need to have more of a solution than just Starlink, which has been really a really great technology and solved that problem in a lot of spots, but probably need to have some other options as well.
Well, I got to congratulate you, Shaun. That was excellent and quick. It's not easy to take a sociological question of that nature, or a political question of that nature, and respond. But we have touched on this topic when we talked about the impact of urbanization, which doesn't have a lot of pluses to it. Homelessness is one of the spin-offs. There is an indication that the rural values versus the urban values may well return, and that AI may be one of the tools that enable you to have more in the rural areas than needing to go to the urban areas in order to get access to knowledge and specialists. Peter, your turn.
I just wanted to throw a few comments in about something Perry triggered and others raised the issue about the future of work or the future of jobs. This is something I do have some experience working in terms of looking at the impact of AI on that area. And one of the things I think the big transition is going to be the next couple of generations of younger people, and that they're going to be striving to get into a career where others are being downsized or are being, if you're not downsized, well, certainly the jobs will be downsizing in many cases, but there will also be a lot of acceleration in job performance because AI will become an assistant, agentic AI, if you like. So there's a still unknown quantity in terms of which direction and how much in either way it's going to go. But I think the young people are going to be the ones who will suffer the most at this point, because the people who already have a job are going to try and keep their jobs if they're not close to retirement. And the young people won't have a job to enter into. I mean, the gig economy is certainly a solution, but the gig economy is, well, it's pretty fragile because it's got no rules whatsoever. And I think the future of those who are employed and get laid off, for example, is going to have to be covered by things like basic income. But who pays for the basic income? I mean, this is, I think, a serious issue that is not clearly understood. And I advocate there's a need for a lot more social scientists to get involved in this technology, because this is the first major I'd say the first technology that we've ever experienced that actually manipulates the human mind at the individual level, not like mass media, not like newspapers. It can manipulate you in a uniquely different way. And you have the power to react to that manipulation with the use of now APIs to large language models or agentic AI, that you can make systems that can do things that are not in the public interest.
I would commend everybody to explore what Noam Chomsky has to say about artificial intelligence and the human experience, to Peter's very, very point. And of course, we all know Noam's almost 100 years old and he's still thinking actively about it. And of course, his original linguistics models were the underlying premise for natural language processing for back in another lifetime.
That's very true, Bill. But of course, as we know, Noam's ideas now are completely out the window with respect to how we see natural language processing.
Oh no!
Gary Grant, for example, was one of the pioneers that helped develop the current model of natural language processing.
Yeah.
And of course, we also have to realize that all this stuff we're talking about is about basically language. There's some aspects in the robotics context. There's vision and manipulation with touch and feel and so on, robotics. But it's mostly about natural language processing. That's only one narrow, but it's the current, low-hanging fruit, as well as robotic sensing and so on. It's a low-hanging fruit in AI. So the future of AI, I think, is humongous if it's properly used. But we could well see the rise of Luddite, the modern Luddites who are going to push back on this. I don't know whether you follow the field, call it a field. It's a new name for stuff that happens with AI, and it's called AI slop. SLOP. Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening on social media like X. And it's disgusting and it's destructive. People are committing suicide because of AI telling them what to do.
Yeah, and if Chomsky was listening in, he would agree entirely with what you just said in terms of that departure point between what his work on natural language processing was. But he would draw attention to, he says, he would fundamentally say syntax or sentence structure is a lot different than meaning structure relative. And so a large language model can get the syntax eerily correct, but it can't do anything on it's semantically dead, right, in that sense. Although to Yogi's point, AGI is coming down the pipe.
This series, as most of you are aware, addresses more than the impact of AI on caring, on profiting, on defending, on the various processes that human beings engage in the course of a day, in the course of their life. We've tried to stay away from the engine itself. The engine itself is developing. What happened in November of 2022 was simply bringing to the public's eye with ChatGPT an awareness of learning language models. What's happened since November of 2022 has been profound and is still just the beginning. When we talk about threats, we talk about critical thinking. We talk about how human beings need to adapt, both in terms of opportunity, but also in terms of caution and threats. The implications are profound for every industry. They're profound for every individual. They're going to be different for emerging economies, as Randall is pointing out in the chat, versus mature. We are in a period of change, and it is a tsunami. And it will make a difference, and hopefully the difference will be positive. I'm not sure that the regulators that we have had of industries are up to speed.
They're not.
I can't imagine.
You're being very cautious, Perry. The regulators are not anywhere near. I didn't get a chance to talk about that.
And that caution is, in one respect, good. On the other hand, if they can't keep up, we're going to miss opportunities. And therein lies one of the concerns: is maybe we rush too fast into opportunity and don't recognize the real threat. It's sessions like this that hopefully will sober everybody up and recognize this is almost a day-to-day visit.
So one of the things that the Trump administration has done with regard to regulations in AI is they basically said, we're going to remove all regulations to open it up, because from a race between China and the United States, the idea is the first one that reaches AGI basically can control the world, and they don't want to have any impediments to being first.
That position is often taken by those that says we will adapt when necessary. And I remember asking Klein a question about a certain policy that was going to have pretty severe impact on our society, and he said, I'm not going to regulate it. When we hit the bone, we'll back off. That means you got to be pretty quick, and government has not historically been that quick, leading to an autocratic model that says we need to leave decision making in a central source so we can make a quick one. That's threatening. Bill?
Harry, I would recommend that we didn't even touch on Alberta's data center aspirations, which would allow us to go down a rabbit hole of many magnitudes. It would be great to reconvene this panel in the not too distant future as some of this stuff unfolds on the impact on Alberta's electricity grid. You know, as Shaun knows, you know, you see the headlines coming out of PGM in the United States down there is I can't drink my well water anymore because the data center down the road has impacted the water table. You know, like that, you know, and Alberta's pushing hard and fast on that with its aspirations. I look out my window here south of Calgary, and there's a Beacon data center just down the road proposed for High River. And we need to come back and revisit all of these things because they'll all show up in the data center discourse on that. So
this technology is a consumer of energy.
Well, that's the current model. I mean, our brains fit all in our little noodles, right? And we're building these gigantic data centers on the premise that we are processing all the world's knowledge to then be able to interrogate it and use it. Well, that's not how biology learned. And I think the learning model is not right yet. I mean, DeepSeek, as an example, has shown you can reduce the amount of energy required and achieve the similar results. It's still not the right model, but it's based on the way in which transformers work.
The biochemistry of the brain is one that we are well aware. The brain is the primary consumer of energy in the human body.
Yes, you're right there.
The processing of knowledge is today echoes that same principle. I'll go out on a limb and say I think technology will arrive at just the right time when we need it, which is fusion energy. But that's we've dealt with in earlier webinars, and we'll deal with that again in the future.